Americans now spend over $11 billion a year on coffee. 11 billion. And yet workplace burnout, brain fog, and the 3 p.m. crash are at an all-time high. We are more caffeinated than any generation in history, and somehow more exhausted. We are drinking more espresso, more cold brew, more nitro-infused, single-origin pour-overs than ever before. And we are falling asleep at our desks. We are waking up tired and staying tired. We are medicating our exhaustion with stimulants, and then medicating the anxiety from those stimulants with alcohol or sleep aids, or scrolling endlessly through our phones until 1 in the morning. It is a cycle that costs us money, costs us sleep, costs us years of our lives. Meanwhile, in Japan, there is a drink that has been consumed for over 800 years. Buddhist monks used it to stay alert during 12-hour meditation sessions, without succumbing to restlessness or drowsiness. Samurai drank it before battle to sharpen their senses, without the jittery hands that coffee would have given them. It costs pennies per cup. It contains a rare amino acid, found almost nowhere else in nature. And it produces a state of alert calm that brain scientists are now calling one of the most underrated cognitive enhancers on the planet. I replaced my morning coffee with this drink for 30 days. By the end of that month, my focus had transformed, my anxiety had dropped, my sleep had improved, and I had discovered something I did not even know I was missing. A kind of steady, quiet clarity that coffee never gave me. Not once, not even on my best day. Today, I am going to tell you exactly what this drink is, how it works inside your brain, the centuries of tradition behind it, and the step-by-step way I prepare it every single morning. I am going to walk you through the science, the ritual, the mistakes I made, and the one thing you must know before you buy your first tin. By the time you finish watching, you will understand why this ancient Japanese drink is quietly replacing coffee in the morning routines of some of the most focused, productive people on Earth. The drink is matcha, but not the matcha you think you know. Not the sugary latte from the chain cafe with the whipped cream and the syrup, and the neon green color that comes from food dye. Not actual tea leaves. Not the dull green powder buried in the back of a health food store that has been sitting on the shelf for 18 months, oxidizing into something bitter and lifeless. Real matcha. Stone ground, shade grown, ceremonial grade matcha from the hills outside Kyoto. The kind that is harvested by hand once a year in the early spring, steamed to lock in the color and the nutrients, deveined, destemmed, and then ground between 2 granite stones so slowly that it takes an hour to produce just 30 grams of powder. That is the matcha I am talking about. And before you dismiss this as just another tea, before you file it away in the same mental category as chamomile or Earl Grey, or that box of green tea bags you bought once and forgot about, I need you to understand something. Matcha is not a tea in the way we think of tea. It is a completely different category of substance. When you brew a cup of green tea, you steep the leaves in hot water for a few minutes and then you throw them away. You are drinking flavored water. You are extracting maybe 10 to 15% of what the leaf actually contains. The vast majority of the antioxidants, the amino acids, the fiber, the chlorophyll, all of it goes into the trash with the spent leaves. But matcha is the whole leaf, the entire plant, deveined and ground into a powder so fine it dissolves into the water. When you drink matcha, you are consuming the entire leaf, every antioxidant, every chlorophyll molecule, every amino acid, every fiber of that leaf enters your digestive system and makes its way into your bloodstream. That is the first reason this drink hits your brain in a way that steeped tea never could. It is the difference between smelling a meal and eating it. The difference between walking past a gym and lifting the weights. You are getting the whole thing. The full spectrum of compounds that nature packed into that leaf, working together in a synergy that science is only beginning to understand. A few years ago, I was in Kyoto, visiting a friend who teaches at the university there. I had been living on coffee for a decade. 3 cups a day, sometimes 4. The first cup hit me like a jolt of electricity. That hot, bitter rush that felt like my brain was finally turning on after a night of dim half-consciousness. I loved it. I craved it. The smell of the beans grinding was the smell of productivity. The sound of the machine was the sound of the day beginning. But by 11 a.m., I was already fading. My eyes felt heavy. My thoughts felt sluggish. I would catch myself staring at the screen, reading the same sentence 3 times, unable to hold onto the meaning. By 2 p.m. I was useless unless I had another cup. And if I drank that second cup too late in the afternoon, I would lie in bed at midnight with my heart tapping against my ribs and my mind spinning through a dozen half-finished thoughts. The ceiling would become a screen for my anxieties. I would replay conversations from the day. I would remember tasks I had forgotten. I would construct elaborate arguments with people who were not there. Coffee gave me energy, but it also gave me anxiety. It sharpened my attention for 90 minutes and then left me more scattered than before. It was a loan shark. It let me focus in the morning and collected with brutal interest in the afternoon and evening. I did not realize any of this was a problem until I spent that week in Kyoto. I did not realize that my baseline state had become a kind of low-grade agitation, a constant hum of urgency that I had mistaken for normal. I thought that was just how life felt. I thought everyone walked around with a subtle tremor in their chest and a mind that would not settle. Every morning my friend would wake up, walk into his tiny kitchen, and spend about 5 minutes making matcha. Not rushing, not multitasking, not checking his phone between steps. Just standing there, moving deliberately, whisking a small bowl of bright green liquid with a bamboo whisk. The kitchen was small, barely room for one person. The morning light came through a narrow window above the sink. He would scoop the powder from a small tin, sift it through a fine strainer, pour the water from a kettle that was never quite boiling, and then whisk. The whisk made a soft, rhythmic sound against the ceramic bowl. Cha-cha-cha, a sound I came to associate with the start of something calm. He would hand me a cup, and we would sit by the window and drink it slowly. Not gulping, not rushing to finish so we could move on to the next thing, just sitting, just drinking. The first thing I noticed was the taste. Vegetal, creamy, slightly sweet, with a finish that was almost savory. It tasted alive. It tasted like a garden after rain. It tasted like something that was still connected to the earth it came from. But the second thing I noticed, the thing that stopped me mid-sip, was what happened inside my head. Within about 20 minutes I felt awake. Not wired, not jittery, not that sharp electric buzz of coffee that makes you feel like you need to do something immediately. Just awake. Calm and awake at the same time. My thoughts felt ordered. I could read a dense article without my attention splintering. I could sit still without reaching for my phone, and the feeling lasted. 4 hours later, I still felt clear. 6 hours later, I still felt steady. There was no crash. There was no anxiety. There was no moment where the floor dropped out from under me, and I suddenly needed another dose. I asked my friend what was happening. I said, "What is in this stuff?" And he told me about something called L-theanine. L-theanine is an amino acid found almost exclusively in tea leaves. And matcha contains it in concentrations that dwarf every other tea on earth. It is not a stimulant. It is not a sedative. It is something rarer and stranger. It is a compound that modulates the way your brain responds to stimulation. A 2019 study from the University of Shizuoka, which is one of the leading tea research institutions in the world, found that shade-grown tea leaves, the kind used for matcha, contain up to 5 times more L-theanine than sun-grown green tea. 5 times. Not 50% more, not double, 5 times the concentration. And the reason is simple and beautiful. When you shade the tea plants for the final 3 to 4 weeks before harvest, the lack of sunlight forces the plant to hold onto its amino acids instead of converting them into catechins. The plant is essentially tricked into preserving its own calming chemistry. The result is a leaf that is chemically distinct from any other tea leaf on Earth. It is softer, sweeter, brighter green, and packed with this compound that does something remarkable inside the human brain. L-theanine crosses the blood-brain barrier within about 30 minutes of ingestion. It does not have to be broken down by the liver or converted into something else. It moves directly into your brain. Once inside, it increases the production of alpha brain waves. Alpha waves are the electrical pattern associated with a state of relaxed alertness. It is the same brain state that experienced meditators achieve after years of practice. It is the state right before sleep where your mind feels expansive and creative, where ideas drift through without urgency, where you are aware but not tense. And L-theanine produces it on demand without sedation. It does not make you sleepy. It makes you still. It turns down the volume on the mental chatter without turning down the volume on your ability to think. A 2008 study published in the journal Nutritional Neuroscience gave participants either a placebo or 50 milligrams of L-theanine, which is roughly the amount in 1 cup of matcha. The researchers measured brain activity using electroencephalography, EEG, and found a significant increase in alpha wave production starting about 40 minutes after ingestion. The participants reported feeling calmer, more focused, and less mentally fatigued. Their performance on attention tasks improved. Their subjective sense of stress declined. And this was not a subtle effect that required statistical analysis to detect. The participants could feel it. They knew something had shifted. No crash, no jitters. No spike in cortisol. Just a smooth, sustained lift that lasted for hours. This is the state the Zen monks were chasing. This is the state that allowed them to sit in meditation from dawn until dusk without their minds rebelling. And they found it in a cup of green powder. But matcha does contain caffeine. I need to be clear about this because I do not want you to think I am describing some caffeine-free alternative. A single serving of matcha delivers about 70 milligrams of caffeine. That is slightly less than a cup of coffee, which averages around 95 milligrams. So if caffeine is the only thing you care about, if your only metric is how many milligrams of stimulant you can pump into your bloodstream before breakfast, coffee wins on raw numbers. But raw milligrams are not how the brain works. The brain is not a measuring cup. It is a complex electrochemical system that responds to compounds in combination, not in isolation. Caffeine in isolation is a blunt instrument. It blocks adenosine receptors, which are the receptors that tell your brain you are tired. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that builds up in your brain throughout the day. The longer you are awake, the more adenosine accumulates. When adenosine binds to its receptors, you feel sleepy. That is the signal. That is your brain telling your body it is time to rest. Caffeine works by blocking those receptors. It does not remove the adenosine. It just prevents the adenosine from delivering its message, so you do not feel tired. That sounds great until you realize that your body is still producing adenosine. It is just piling up in the background, waiting for the caffeine to wear off. When the caffeine molecules finally detach from the receptors, all that accumulated adenosine floods in at once, and you crash. Hard. That is the coffee cycle. Block fatigue, borrow energy, crash, repeat. And every cycle requires a slightly higher dose because your brain adapts by producing more receptors. That is why 1 cup becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and 3 becomes a dependency you cannot function without. But L-theanine changes the entire equation. A 2015 study from the University of Leeds looked at the combined effects of caffeine and L-theanine on cognitive performance. The researchers gave participants either caffeine alone, L-theanine alone, a combination of both, or a placebo. Then they ran them through a battery of cognitive tests measuring attention switching, reaction time, working memory, and subjective mental fatigue. The results were striking. When the two compounds were taken together, participants performed better on attention-switching tasks and reported lower levels of mental fatigue than when they took caffeine alone. The L-theanine seemed to smooth out the rough edges of the caffeine. It reduced the jitteriness. It extended the duration of the focus. It turned a spike into a plateau. The caffeine provided the alertness. The L-theanine provided the calm. Together, they produced a state that neither compound could produce on its own. That is what I felt in my friend's kitchen in Kyoto. Not a spike, not a jolt. A plateau of clarity that lasted for hours. My brain was awake, but my body was still. My thoughts were moving, but they were moving in a straight line, not in the frantic zigzag that coffee always produced. Now here is the part where I tell you about my own experiment, because I am not the kind of person who trusts a feeling. I have been fooled by feelings before. I have felt energized by a new supplement only to realize a week later that I was just having a good week. I wanted data. I wanted to know if this was real or if I was just caught up in the romance of being in Japan. So when I got back to the United States, I ordered a tin of ceremonial-grade matcha directly from a farm in Uji, which is a region just south of Kyoto that has been producing matcha for over 800 years. The soil there is rich and volcanic. The hills are often shrouded in mist. The tea plants have been tended by the same families for generations. I bought a bamboo whisk called a chasen, which is carved from a single piece of bamboo and has dozens of delicate tines. I bought a small ceramic bowl called a chawin, wide and shallow, designed specifically for whisking matcha. I bought a bamboo scoop called a chashaku. I committed to drinking matcha every morning for 30 days instead of coffee. No other changes. Same diet, same exercise, same sleep schedule. I just swapped one morning drink for another. Here is what happened. Week 1 was harder than I expected. Not because of the matcha itself, but because I missed the ritual of coffee. The smell of the beans grinding. The sound of the machine. The dark, bitter punch of that first sip. Coffee was not just a drink. It was a signal. It was the thing that told my brain the day had started. Without it, my mornings felt incomplete. They felt like they were missing their center. Matcha felt foreign. It felt like a health food. It felt like something I was doing for an experiment, not something I was doing for pleasure. The taste was strange. Grassy and vegetal, and nothing like the roasted caramel notes I loved in coffee. I found myself craving coffee in the afternoons. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted the taste, the warmth, the ritual. I almost quit on day 4. I told myself the experiment was stupid, that coffee was fine, that billions of people drank coffee and lived perfectly healthy lives. But I pushed through because I had already told myself I would give it 30 days. I had made a commitment, and I am stubborn about commitments. By day 10, something shifted. I woke up one morning and realized I had not thought about coffee at all. The craving was gone. I just walked into the kitchen, boiled water, sifted the matcha powder and whisked it into a froth. The motion felt natural. The taste no longer seemed vegetal or strange. It tasted clean. It tasted like focus. My palate had adjusted. I was no longer comparing it to coffee. I was tasting it on its own terms. And my brain was changing. I noticed it first in my writing. I write for a living. Articles, scripts, essays. My output had always been tied to my coffee schedule. Morning coffee meant morning pages. Afternoon coffee meant afternoon pages. Without coffee, I felt sluggish and dull, like an engine that would not turn over. But on matcha, I found that I could sit down at 9 a.m. and write for 3 hours without looking up. Not in a frantic, over-caffeinated sprint, where I was typing as fast as my fingers could move. Just a steady, sustained flow. My thoughts did not race, they lined up. One sentence followed the next, without the usual tangents and distractions. I would look up at the clock and realize 2 hours had passed, and I had not checked my phone once. I had not opened a new tab. I had not wandered into the kitchen for a snack. I was just working, deeply, quietly working. I was getting more done in less time, and I felt less drained at the end of it. The quality of my focus had changed. It was not just that I could concentrate longer. It was that the concentration itself felt different. It felt less effortful. It felt like a river I could step into rather than a wall I had to climb. By day 20, I noticed something else. My sleep had improved. This surprised me because I had not changed anything about my evening routine. I was going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, and yet my sleep tracker was showing a consistent increase in deep sleep. About 45 extra minutes per night on average. 45 minutes of deep sleep is enormous. Deep sleep is the stage of sleep where your brain clears out metabolic waste, consolidates memories, and repairs tissue. It is the most restorative phase of the sleep cycle, and I was getting nearly an hour more of it every single night. I dug into the research and found that coffee, even when consumed in the morning, can interfere with sleep architecture. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours. That means that a cup of coffee at 8 a.m. leaves half its caffeine still active at 1 p.m. A quarter of its caffeine is still circulating in your bloodstream at 7 p.m. And by 10 p.m., when you are trying to fall asleep, there is still enough caffeine in your system to suppress deep sleep without you even realizing it. You are not lying awake. You are not tossing and turning. You are simply getting less restorative sleep than your body needs. You are sleeping, but you are not recovering, and over time that deficit accumulates. You wake up tired, so you drink more coffee. The coffee impairs your sleep, so you wake up tired again. It is a cycle that feeds itself. Matcha. Because it contains less caffeine, and because the L-theanine promotes a state of calm that helps the nervous system downregulate, did not seem to have the same effect. My deep sleep went up. My resting heart rate went down. I woke up feeling genuinely refreshed for the first time in years. Not just awake, refreshed. There is a difference. Awake is a state of consciousness. Refreshed is a state of restoration. I had been awake every morning for years. I had not been refreshed in a very long time. Now I want to talk about how to prepare matcha properly, because the preparation is not separate from the effect. In Japan, the act of making matcha is considered a practice. It is not something you rush through while scrolling on your phone. It is a moment of stillness, and that stillness matters. It matters more than you think. When I first started drinking matcha, I treated it like instant coffee. I dumped the powder into a mug, poured hot water over it, stirred it with a spoon, and drank it while checking email. It was fine. It worked. The L-theanine still crossed my blood-brain barrier. The caffeine still blocked my adenosine receptors. But I was missing half the benefit. The ritual of matcha, the slow, deliberate process of sifting, whisking, and sipping, is a form of what the Japanese call mindfulness in motion. It forces you to stop. It forces you to be present. You cannot whisk matcha properly while looking at your phone. You cannot sift the powder while thinking about your inbox. The process demands your attention, and that presence compounds the effect of the L-theanine. You are not just consuming a calming compound. You are engaging in a calming practice. The two things reinforce each other. The biochemistry and the behavior work together to shift your nervous system into a different state. This is something coffee culture has lost. Coffee is something we grab. We grab it on the way to the train. We grab it in the drive-thru. We grab it between meetings. It is fuel, not ritual. Matcha is different. Matcha asks you to pause. Here is how I make it now. I have refined this process over months of practice, and I have made every mistake you can make. I have used water that was too hot and ended up with a bitter, scorched cup that tasted like burnt grass. I have skipped the sifting and ended up with lumpy, gritty matcha that left a film on my teeth. I have used too much powder and felt overstimulated and jittery. I have used too little and wondered why nothing was happening. Here is the method that works. I wake up and the first thing I do is put water on to boil. I use filtered water because the taste of tap water, especially if it is chlorinated, will ruin the delicate flavor of the matcha. While the water heats, I take my chawan, my small ceramic bowl, and I pour a little hot water into it to warm the bowl. This is a step that many Westerners skip, but it matters. A cold bowl will cool your water too quickly, and you will not get the proper extraction. I swirl the hot water around the bowl for a few seconds, and then dump it out. I dry the bowl with a clean cloth. Then I take my tin of matcha, and I scoop about 1 teaspoon of the powder into a fine mesh strainer set over the bowl. This step, the sifting, is not optional. Matcha clumps. It is a very fine powder, and it is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture from the air. Even if you keep it sealed in a tin, tiny clumps will form. If you skip the sifting, you will end up with bitter lumps floating in your cup, and the texture will be grainy instead of smooth. I press the powder through the strainer with the back of a small spoon. I do this gently, patiently. The powder falls into the bowl like a soft green snow. It is a beautiful thing to watch. Then I pour the hot water over it, not boiling water. This is critical. Boiling water scorches matcha and makes it bitter. It destroys some of the delicate aromatic compounds. The ideal temperature is about 175 degrees Fahrenheit. If you do not have a thermometer, just let the boiling water sit for about 2 minutes before pouring. You can also pour the water into a separate cup first and then into the matcha bowl. That transfer alone will drop the temperature by about 10 degrees. I add about 2 ounces of water, just enough to cover the powder and create a thin paste. Then I take my chasen, my bamboo whisk, and I whisk. Not in a circular stirring motion, but in a rapid back and forth zigzag. The goal is to create a froth, a layer of tiny uniform bubbles on the surface. This takes about 15 seconds. The sound of the bamboo tines against the ceramic bowl is soft and rhythmic. Cha-cha-cha, it is one of the most soothing sounds I know. When the surface is covered in a pale green foam, I lift the whisk and set it aside. Then I pick up the bowl with both hands. Both hands, this is important. The bowl is warm. The warmth transfers into your palms. You bring the bowl to your lips and you drink. Not a sip, not a gulp. You drink slowly, feeling the warmth, tasting the layers of flavor. The first note is vegetal, almost grassy. Then a sweetness emerges. Then a savory finish that lingers on your tongue. The whole process takes about 5 minutes. 5 minutes, that is the investment, and what I get in return is 4 to 6 hours of calm, steady focus. No crash, no anxiety, no reaching for a second cup at 2 p.m. Just clarity. Just the quiet hum of a brain that is awake and at peace. I want to address something that might be on your mind right now. Something that kept me from trying matcha for years. Is matcha expensive? The answer is yes and no. Good matcha, real matcha, the kind that comes from Uji or Kagoshima, and is stone ground and shade grown and harvested by hand, costs more than a box of tea bags. A 30-gram tin of ceremonial-grade matcha will run you somewhere between $25 and $40. That tin contains about 15 to 20 servings, depending on how much powder you use per cup. So you are looking at roughly $1.50 to $2 per cup. Compare that to a coffee shop latte, which now averages over $5 in most American cities. And matcha suddenly looks like a bargain. You are paying less than half for a drink that gives you more sustained focus and does not come with a crash. But even if you are comparing it to home-brewed coffee, which costs maybe 30 cents a cup, I would argue that the math still favors matcha, because coffee costs you in ways that are not measured in dollars per ounce. It costs you in lost sleep quality. It costs you in afternoon productivity crashes. It costs you in the low-grade anxiety that hums beneath your skin all day, the tension in your shoulders, the irritability when someone interrupts you before you have had your second cup. It costs you in the medical expenses that accumulate over years of chronic stress and poor sleep. What is that worth? What would you pay to wake up feeling rested? What would you pay to work for 3 hours without your attention splintering? What would you pay to fall asleep easily and sleep deeply, and wake up without an alarm clock? For me, the answer is a lot more than $2 a day. I would pay 10, I would pay 20. Because the alternative is spending my days in a fog of borrowed energy, and my nights in a haze of restless half-sleep. There is also the question of lead. You may have heard that matcha can contain lead because tea plants absorb lead from the soil, and because you are consuming the whole leaf. You are ingesting whatever the plant has absorbed. This is true in a technical sense. Tea plants do absorb lead from the soil. It is a natural process that occurs with many plants. But the actual risk depends entirely on where the tea is grown and how the soil is managed. Matcha from China, particularly from regions with heavy industrial pollution and lax environmental regulations, can contain elevated levels of lead and other heavy metals. Matcha from Japan, particularly from the traditional growing regions around Kyoto and Kagoshima, is subject to strict agricultural standards that limit heavy metal contamination. The soil is tested regularly. The water is monitored. The entire supply chain is transparent in a way that is rare in the global tea trade. A 2018 analysis by the consumer watchdog group Consumer Lab tested multiple brands of matcha from different countries and found that Japanese matcha consistently contained lead levels well below the safety thresholds set by the World Health Organization. The key is to buy from reputable Japanese producers who test their products and who can tell you exactly where the tea was grown. If you are spending $15 on a pound of matcha from an unknown source, you are probably buying something that was grown in polluted soil and processed with industrial methods. That is not matcha. That is green-colored dust. It will taste bitter and metallic. It will not give you the calm focus I have been describing. It may even make you feel sick. Spend the extra money. Buy from a source you can trace. Your brain is worth the investment. Let me tell you about one more thing I discovered during my 30-day experiment. Something I was not expecting at all. Something that surprised me more than the focus or the sleep. Around day 25, I noticed that my relationship with hunger had changed. I was not less hungry exactly. My appetite was still there. But the urgency was gone. The desperation was gone. I could feel hunger without feeling like I had to eat immediately. I could work through lunch without getting irritable or lightheaded or distracted by thoughts of food. I could go 4 or 5 hours between meals without my blood sugar crashing and taking my mood down with it. This was new for me. I had always been someone who needed to eat every 3 hours or I would become a different person. Snappy, foggy, unable to concentrate. My wife used to joke that she could set a clock by my hunger. But on matcha, that clock stopped ticking. I did some research and found that matcha contains a catechin called EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, which is one of the most studied compounds in the tea family. EGCG has been shown to moderate blood sugar spikes by inhibiting the enzymes that break down carbohydrates in the gut. When those enzymes are inhibited, carbohydrates are absorbed more slowly. The glucose enters your bloodstream gradually instead of all at once. A 2020 study from the University of Tokushima found that participants who consumed matcha with a meal had a significantly lower blood glucose response than those who consumed the same meal without matcha. The EGCG appeared to slow the absorption of carbohydrates, smoothing out the spike and preventing the crash. This is why I no longer felt that desperate, shaky hunger at 11 a.m. My blood sugar was simply more stable. And stable blood sugar means stable energy, stable mood, stable focus. All from a single cup of green powder. I was not dieting. I was not restricting calories. I was just drinking matcha, and my body was responding by regulating itself more smoothly. Now I want to be honest about something. Matcha is not a miracle. It will not turn you into a productivity machine overnight. It will not erase years of sleep deprivation in a week. It will not make you smarter or faster or immune to distraction. What it will do, if you give it time, is slowly recalibrate your relationship with your own energy. Coffee taught me that energy was something I had to borrow. A loan I took out every morning and repaid with interest every afternoon. Energy was scarce. It was something I had to manage, something I had to supplement, something that was always running out. Matcha taught me that energy could be steady, that focus did not have to come with anxiety, that I could feel awake without feeling wired, that I could feel calm without feeling sleepy. That shift took about 2 weeks. 2 weeks of drinking a green liquid that tasted like grass and felt foreign in my mouth. 2 weeks of missing the ritual of coffee and wondering if I was wasting my time. 2 weeks of almost quitting and talking myself back into it. And then one morning, I sat down to work and realized I had been writing for 2 hours without stopping. My mind was clear, my body was still. The world outside my window was quiet and I was quiet inside it. That was the moment I knew I would never go back. Not because coffee was evil or because matcha was magic, but because I had found a way of being awake that did not cost me my peace. Here is what I want you to do. Tomorrow morning, do not reach for the coffee. Instead, find a source of good matcha. Ceremonial grade. From Japan. A farm in Uji or Kagoshima if you can find one. Sift it. Whisk it, drink it slowly. Do not rush. Do not check your phone. Just stand in your kitchen and make the drink and drink it. Do this for 1 week. Just 1 week. Pay attention to how your focus feels. Pay attention to the quality of your energy. Pay attention to what happens around 2 in the afternoon, when the coffee crash usually hits. Pay attention to how you sleep. I think you will be surprised. I think you will find that the calm, alert state I have been describing is not something you need years of meditation to achieve. It is not something reserved for monks or samurai or people who live in the hills outside Kyoto. It is something that grows in the shade on those hills. It is something that has been harvested and ground and packaged and shipped across the ocean to wherever you are right now. It is something that has been waiting for you for 800 years. Try it.